I'm excited to welcome Oran Kivity from Taiwan and Merlin Young from Birmingham, UK, for this talk about Moxa. We're talking about that because the second edition of the book Moon over Matushima, Insights into Moxa and Mugwort was just released. It's has been largely rewritten by Merlin and it's being published by Sayoshi Books from Oran. And I understand that, Merlin, you kind of came up with a new concept that you want to explain today that's super important for doing Moxa and understanding Moxa.
Yeah, I think it's a whole window on a new um, possible mechanisms of Moxa, which, if validated, and I think there's every reason to believe that they could be validated, and they may well be, then they're very, very exciting in my opinion. And I'll try and explain why. Yeah.
Just for everyone to understand, Merlin is kind of the Moxa expert. He's also the founder and or the co-founder and the chair of Moxa Africa that has been doing a lot of work on Moxa. Yeah, let you guys discuss about Moxa. Oren, you will present a little bit something about Moxa first, and then Merlin, you explain this new findings. And I'm very curious what you have to say.
So, hello everyone. Greetings from Taiwan. I wanted to talk to you about heat and unlocking the heat in Moxa, which is going to tie in very nicely with what Merlin talks about. Because a lot of the time in acupuncture school, we hear that we cannot use Moxa in hot conditions. So I want to explore that assumption and talk about it from a Japanese acupuncture perspective. And in Japanese acupuncture, we do use Moxa for hot conditions. So what I'd like to do is share a little PowerPoint with you. It's not very many slides where I kind of explore this idea that about using Moxa in hot conditions. We're going to try and reframe moxibustion in the context of Japanese acupuncture and moxibustion. And I'll start off with a philosophical point about Moxa, which is that yang creates yin. So we can use Moxa and yang to create yin. So just a philosophical point. But actually, I'm not a philosophical person. I come very much from a pragmatic background. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about my Moxa path, because like most of us, I started off with a Moxa pole and I was using Moxa sticks. And then later on, I learned about Japanese rice grain moxibustion and cone moxa and needle moxa, and I found it very, very effective. And it's kind of fiddly and time consuming to do rice grain moxibustion, and not all of us are that skilled at it. But I then kind of developed Ontake warm bamboo, which is kind of what I'm well known for. And what we can say about Moxa is that it feels great. I mean, that kind of warmth of warm needle Moxa or Ontake Moxa, it just feels very warming and very pleasant. So the body responds to it very well. And I think Merlin will explain more why the body responds to it so well from a more scientific point of view. But I would like to talk a little bit about a Qigong teacher I had a long time ago. And he said, you know, this word Qigong is very, very generic. It's a bit like saying drink rather than saying whiskey or milk or coffee. It's just like saying drink. It means cultivating qi. And there's so many ways to cultivate qi. And we talk about moxibustion as if it's one thing. So we just say, you know, moxibustion is this, and these are the rules for moxibustion. But we don't make any distinction between the kinds of moxibustion that there are. So, you know, there's a rule for drink, right? We should be drinking 2 liters of water a day. But we can't say the same for whiskey. We shouldn't be drinking 2 liters of whiskey a day. So, you know, drink is different. There's a huge spectrum of drinks. And it's the same with moxa. So there's a spectrum of moxibustion techniques. Now, let me give you some examples. There are methods of moxibustion that are undeniably heating. So you think about a moxa box, it's a big wire basket, and you fill it full of moxa, and you light it, and you put it on the skin, and you put it on someone's back or on someone's tummy, and it starts to get very hot. And when you move it, the skin is red and sweating. So that's undeniably a hot technique. And there's a technique in China called big snake moxibustion, where they put layers of garlic and ginger and warming herbs all over the spine. And then they put moxacones on top of that and they heat the whole mess. And that gets super hot and it blisters the skin. So, again, no one's going to deny that that is a heating technique. Now we look at kind of milder moxa techniques, and we can think about moxa on ginger, or moxa on salt, or warm needle technique where you put moxa on the end of the needle. And those techniques, I think we can say, are more warming than heating. And then we can look at Japanese acupuncture techniques where you have rice grain moxibustion. And with this, you're rolling these very, very small cones very, very loosely so that the moxa is not compressed or tight. And you're pinching these tiny little cones off and you're sticking them on the skin. So this kind of technique is not considered to be heating in the Japanese acupuncture canon. It's considered to be stimulating. And of course, if you, it makes sense if you compare the two. If I burn a tiny little cone at large intestine 2, and I maybe burn 3 of those cones, that is simply not the same technique as big snake moxibustion on the spine, and it has very different physiological effects. So I think that what I'm trying to tell you, or what I'm trying to say, is that there is a spectrum of moxibustion, and perhaps those rules about you must not use moxa in hot conditions apply to the techniques that are really heating. Whereas there are techniques that you can use which are not heating but stimulating. And in those cases, you'll find that those rules should not apply. I'll say a couple of other things. For those of you who have central heating, this is a nice analogy. So we can say that when you have a central heating system, there are valves on the radiators, and they adjust the flow of water through the radiators. And then you can also have a little key, and you can bleed off the air in the radiator when there's blockage. And then sometimes the whole system runs low on water, so you can repressurize it, just letting a tap open and you kind of fill up the system again. So this is not an analogy I can use in Taiwan because no one has central heating. But for you Europeans, I think it makes sense. So we can think about this. There was a Korean guy called Sung Baek who wrote a book about moxibustion, I think in the late 80s, which is published by Blue Poppy Press. And he said this. He said that needling accesses the existing energy in the body and moves it around. And bloodletting or microbleeding drains energy from the body, but moxibustion adds energy to the body. So it's adding something to the body, but it's not necessarily adding heat in the way that we think of it in TCM terms, where they say for warm conditions, don't prescribe warm herbs. You prescribe cooling herbs. So moxibustion is adding energy to the body, but not in that same way. And this slide really shouldn't be there. It's just to say that when we do on take, which is the thing that I'm famous for, it probably comes somewhere between warming and stimulating. So now I'm going to give you a few examples of hot conditions where we can use moxa. One of those is skin conditions. So when you have raised red skin conditions such as eczema and psoriasis, then you can think of it as a local disturbance of yin and yang. And the raised area where the lesion is excess, jitsu, and the surrounding skin is therefore, in terms of yin and yang, deficient. So what we do with moxa is we supplement the qi flow on the borders of the lesion. And we can also use the large intestine channel. We can do moxa at large intestine 4 or 11 or 15. And I've got a diagram here that shows you what I'm talking about. So you can see, oh, if I get my pointer, let me get a laser pointer. There we go. Here is the lesion, here in the center. And if this is excess, then this area here must be deficient. And this area here is normal. We can look at it here. Here's the lesion. It's raised and red. And this area, therefore, is deficient. And this area is normal. So we want to do Moxa all around. Now, Fukaya, who was a 20th century moxibustion practitioner, he recommended doing rice grain cones around the lesions. So north, south, west, and east, just kind of doing 4 points. I sometimes use on taquet and go around the lesion. But anyway, this is a hot condition where you can use Moxa. There was also another guy, a Japanese guy called Hirata, and he developed a treatment model using dermatomes on the body. So he divided the area into horizontal zones, and he applied heat on these horizontal zones. So you can see that there are 12 zones on the head, 12 zones on the face, 12 on the chest, the torso, 12 on the arm, and 12 on the leg. Also on the neck, but yes, also on the neck here. And he developed a way of treating these using, he called it hot needle therapy. So it was a conical tool filled with burning alcohol, and he would tap that on the skin. And a few years ago, Junji Mitsutani, who is the editor of the North American Journal of Oriental Medicine, he wrote his own perception of this Hirata device. He said, I actually tried this device out on myself. I didn't reference Hirata zone, but instead I just treated tight areas. And the feeling of the treatment was brief, stinging, sharp sensations. And the next day, there were many small burns about 2 millimeters across. Well, of course, we don't want to be treating our patients with little cones filled with burning alcohol lined with asbestos and giving them 2 millimeter blisters the next day. But we can use, for example, on taquet, or we can use platform Moxa on the Hirata zones. So it's a way to treat the whole body. And if I give you some examples here of the kind of things that Hirata was treating, you can see, look, heart disease, atherosclerosis, angina pectoris, myocarditis, endocarditis. So a lot of tachycardia, a lot of hot conditions that he was coming up with prescriptions for and treating routinely in his clinic: laryngitis, periodontitis, toothache. So hot conditions, or deficiency heat conditions, which he treated with his hot needle therapy. So I just want to give you some examples of how we can use Moxa for hot conditions. And I think I can finish that presentation now and just kind of throw that open and see if any of you would like to add anything to that. I guess just to summarize, Yang creates yin. So you can use Moxa to create yin in the body, and you can use Moxa on deficiency heat conditions. And also you can use it in a very pragmatic way, surround Moxa on hot conditions, also for hot inflamed joints, skin conditions. You can use it on hot conditions in that kind of situation as well. Thanks. Over to you.
Okay, do you mind if I jump in here, Oran? Because I've got a couple of comments. The first thing, and they're very much coherent with what you're saying. The first thing is that I think that the TCM that we've inherited in the West is quite a dogmatic version of TCM, arguably a little bit politicized. So things are very, very hard and fast. And actually, I have a book in my treatment room, which is Chinese, which actually prescribes Moxa for high blood pressure. I was taught, don't, if the blood pressure, the difference between systolic and diastolic is more than 50, I think it was, don't use Moxa, whatever you do. So there's plainly existing difference in amongst Chinese acupuncturists, acumoxa people. And in my from my research, it's also historically the case. It's been that way for at least 200 years. There's been a debate about should we or shouldn't we use moxa in heat conditions. And I think we both agree that the TCM, I'm going to call it dogma, is based on the dominance of herbalism in current TCM. But the other thing is a personal experience, we've been using with Mox Africa. Simon referenced the Mox Africa projects, and we've been using moxa, specifically moxa, no acupuncture, for treating tuberculosis, which obviously is a disease that is largely absent in affluent societies, but is rampant in the poorer quarters of our world. And one of the symptoms of tuberculosis is very much reflective of what we'd call in TCM, what we call empty heat. And when we first started trying to publicize what we were trying to do to elicit support from the acupuncture community, I copped a bit of flack here and there. You can't use moxa. You can't use moxa on an empty heat condition. And the fact is that moxa has been used at least since the 7th century for treating TB. It wasn't called TB in those days. In the Ming Dynasty, very aggressive moxa for treating TB. And in Japan, in the 20th century, a lot of moxa for treating TB. And this was in a period when there weren't any drug treatments for TB. And it's effective. It supports recovery, and we've got our own clinical evidence for that now. So I think the dogma is justifiably questionable, and a bit more. So I just throw that into your mix, really.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
There is one thing I'd add as well, actually, which is that we live in a litigious world.
Litigious.
World, yeah. We live in a litigious world, which means that we do need to be sensible and we do need to be cautious. And I do personally think that if we have learned techniques, moxa techniques, which prescribe the use of moxa in heat conditions or for the sake of with blood pressure, then actually we should be careful about using those same techniques. But if we're using techniques like the ones you described, which don't have those prescriptions, then there's supportive evidence to say that it can be used, in which case we can defend our practice. So I think that also we've got to be a little bit savvy about how we apply the general principle of, it's okay to use moxa. Well, if patients have accidents after treatment, sometimes it's just the way it goes. So if a patient comes to grief for some reason after a treatment of ours where we've used a technique which we've learned, say back at acupuncture school when we were told not to use moxa for heat, that specific technique, then actually we are leaving ourselves open to potential problems. And I think that's important to bear that in mind. But nevertheless, there is no doubt in my mind that moxa can be used judiciously, like it always should be, with heat conditions. Definitely. Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
Thanks, Oran, for presenting that, and Merlin for your comments. But I find it also very important to make the point that you made, Oran, at the beginning of your presentation, and what you just said, Merlin. There are different types of moxa, and if you just say you can use moxa for heat conditions, we may have to classify what kind of moxa. That we use the small cone moxa or the ontake type moxa, where you warm certain areas, that you can use that for heat conditions, but not the kind of gross moxa where you burn a lot of moxa heat on a point. So we may also have to classify what kind of moxa we are using.
Yeah, and I think that's really a key point, is that you can't make rules for all moxa. So you can't say this is not safe, and you can't say this is safe for all kinds of moxa. So it really has to be, what kind of moxa are you talking about? It's the same when people say, oh, moxa is good for immunity. Well, Merlin will know more about this than me, but what kind of moxa is good for immunity? It's not actually a moxa stick. All the research about immunity is down to rice grain moxibustion, like small cone moxibustion. There's no research that says using a moxa stick on stomach 36 is good for immunity. So yeah, I think if people take anything away from this talk so far, it is that each technique should be dealt with and looked at within the context of the literature applying to that technique, and the rules for other techniques should not be applied to that same technique. So yeah, I think that's a great point.
I see things online with TCM practitioners talking about Moxa for using pole Moxa, and then they quote this thing about how Moxa can raise white blood cell count, and it goes into great detail. And I know exactly where it came from. It came from a study that was published in 1929 in Fukuoka in Japan, and they were using 1 milligram rice grain Moxa cones. There wasn't a Moxa pole or a Moxa stick in sight. So actually, it's casual referencing, and I think we owe it to ourselves to be careful about how we ascribe things as optimistically as we might want to be doing it, and for all the right reasons.
Merlin, tell us more about Moxa.
Okay, well, my talk's going to be a little bit more complex and more dense than yours, so I want to apologize from the start and encourage people just to strap themselves in for a minute. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Okay, I hope
this got it.
Come up. Okay. So I want to talk about something which I suspect a lot of listeners will never have heard of before, called TRPs, and particularly how Moxa can affect them, and it relates to at least one of the mechanisms of Moxa with specific, again, with that qualification, specific technique. Just before I start, I want to just summarize my view of Moxa is that Moxa is massively underrated, has been from really day one of acupuncture. It's definitely older than acupuncture, that's for sure. And arguably, and I'm pretty convinced, it actually stimulated the development of channel theory and chi regulation, which the early acupuncturists took on, developed into a sophisticated system of therapy. And Moxa has been and still does get treated as the poor relative because of its low skill requirement, because it's so simple, because it's smoky, because it's primitive, etc., really. But nevertheless, evidence right from the start suggests that it was well known that Moxa could create effects that acupuncture couldn't. So, and over the centuries, the acceptability of acupuncture historically clearly fluctuated in China, but the use of Moxa for particular conditions remained consistent. So these are the traditional strengths of Moxa. This is what you can pick up from studying the history. Three things really: last resort treatment, which would be massive doses of Moxa to try and save somebody's life from basically yang collapse. For longevity, and definitely since the Tang Dynasty, since probably 5th, 6th century, longevity's been in the mix. You've got Sun Simiao, who's the famous physician from the Tang Dynasty, lived to 108 years old, apparently. Well, that's pretty old for the time, and he was using Moxa, and he was using rice grain, interestingly, or pellets anyway. And the third thing is for treating intractable disease. Exactly how you might define that back 2,000 years ago is probably debatable, but at least since the 7th century, that included treating tuberculosis, because that is in the literature. But I just want to point you to a quote in the Ling Shu. Ling Shu it's sometimes people call it the needle classic. And in Ling Shu 73, there's a very, very revealing statement. Moxa can be effective when needling is not effective. Despite that, there's almost no techniques. Well, there are no techniques described for doing Moxa in the Ling Shu, whereas there's some beautiful passages describing how to needle. So these are a couple of quotes here from different periods of time, which kind of support what I'm saying in a circumstantial way. Acupuncture can kill living people. As I said, it had a fluctuating story, acupuncture, because from time to time, probably the wrong people died after acupuncture, the emperor or the emperor's concubines or something. It cannot revive the dying, therefore I only adopt Moxa. The implication here is very clear, that Moxa can revive the dying, as I say, last resort treatment. And a doctor not using actually my screen's covered, so I can't even see the quote, but you can read it yourself. In a culture which which is so food focused, I think that that this second one is revealing. You need the fuel to create the flavors, and it's the same with the Moxa. So I want to go back to where we started, which is talking about TRPs. Now, in my opinion, there are multiple mechanisms for Moxa, and Oran's already touched some of them. There's obviously the aspect of Qi regulation. There's the aspect of immune response, which up until recently I thought was dominated by what Junji Mitsutani described as this autonomic nervous system balancing, which affects the immune system. But more recently, this aspect of what we call TRPs, or transient receptor potential ion channels, has emerged. And so I want to discuss how they may be relevant to Moxa. There's also an aspect of infrared absorption, which I won't go into here, but I just wanted to stress that there are and also with Oran's technique, very interesting, because there's this beautiful tapping, and there's a beautiful effect from that to create a parasympathetic response. I think Jeffrey Dan describes it as the sort of the reassurance of the mother's touch. So we're working with actually quite a complex, although it's relatively simple, we're working with a complex dynamic. So I want to talk a bit about these TRPs. This is a full one. This is a full slide, but basically there are 28 TRPs that are now known to exist in mammals. They exist in subfamilies. So there's TRP-V, TRP-A, TRP-C, TRP-M, and within them, there are individual ones which are identifiable by numbers. TRP-V1, for instance, TRP-A1 and TRP-M8. These are going to be the three that we're going to focus on because they have such interesting connections with Moxa. And it says in this slide, but it's worth stressing that TRPs basically are known to be expressed, which means they occur on the surface of all sorts of cells, in the skin, the lungs, the brain, the kidney, heart, the immune cells. Basically they're throughout the body. So this is a simple representation of a TRP over here, and I need to bring up my pointer. Okay, so this over here is a simple representation. Now, cells are minute, and these guys are expressed on the surface of the cell, so they're beyond minute. They are tiny, and there are many on many. There are trillions of cells in the body. I think there are 10 trillion cells in the body, something like that, I think. So these things are they're like valves on the outside of the cell, and they allow certain things in or they block them off. Now, under normal circumstances, they're closed. This is a closed one here. The TRP is expressed on the surface of the cell. This is the cell wall here, but closed. And when triggered by what is described as an agonist, they open and they allow the passage of tiny positive ions, cations, to pass through the TRP to activate the cell. They excite the inside of a cell. So this over here on the left side, this is a quote, technical quote. TRP channels cause calcium cations, so they've got two little positive charges on them, influx in response to various stimuli which cause a brief rise in intracellular calcium, as well as a swift modification of the calcium signal pathways. And depending on what they're for, then the brain gets triggered by them. So one of the things is to do with temperature. So they're temperature sensors, and different ones trigger at different points. And this here we've got from warmer temperature TRPs to cooler temperature TRPs. So we've got over here we've got TRPV2, which triggers at 52 degrees. That will cause you a first-degree burn. And at the other side, we've actually got TRPA1 here. It's not marked, but there's a reason for that. And that's at a much lower temperature. So that's below natural body heat. So they're sensing extreme heat that we need to avoid, and they're also sensing more extreme cold that we need to avoid. In both cases, they create painful experience in the brain. And all being well. So this one here, TRPV1, we're going to be talking quite a bit about this. It's to do with pain perception, and it triggers at 43 degrees centigrade or above. But if it gets above 52, that'll shut down and this one will come in. So 43 degrees centigrade is a temperature which cells will start to die. So it's a temperature that we need to avoid, but it's not going to cause us first-degree burns. TPRM8, which is another cold center, we're going to come back to this one because it's affected by Moxa. It affects at temperatures below 28 degrees centigrade, and TRPA1 below 17 centigrade. When this is triggered, it creates a sensation of cold and in the brain. And when this is triggered, it provokes a sensation of more extreme cold, painful cold. So this is how Moxa can affect them. TRPV1 is affected only by heat. Pain is desensitized by one of its chemical agonists, which is capsicum. It's known as the capsicum receptor, actually. And it gets desensitized. It can get desensitized by scattered Moxa or judicious Moxa, because that heat that we provoke by Moxa is an effective agonist to open this channel up. But when it's done judiciously, it actually has the opposite effect. It desensitizes them. So that's one of the ways that we think now that Moxa works, particularly in respect of reducing the sensation of pain, but also in inducing other effects, which would include inflammatory or anti-inflammatory effects. And then we've got TRPA1. If you remember, TRPA1 triggers at a lower temperature than body heat. It has natural antagonists. There are only two known natural antagonists. These are natural chemical antagonists in the whole of the natural world. And one is 1,8-cineol and the other is borneol. And by a bizarre coincidence, both of these are not just dominant chemicals in mugwort, they are actually the dominant chemicals in mugwort, which is an extraordinary thing. So, and what they do is they inhibit the activation of TRPA1. So if TRPA1 is actually open and functioning, and it can do in chronic painful conditions, the actual contact of mugwort on the skin is likely to inhibit the activation and reduce the pain. And the third one is TRPM8. And this has a natural agonist, which is borneol. It's our same friend, it's the borneol. And that actually provokes a cooling sensation if it's able to be absorbed through the skin, so the receptors beneath the skin can receive them. So by a bizarre combination of effects, Moxa, through heat, through its chemical constituents, can have a very complex effect on these three TRPs. And these three TRPs frequently coexist. They're expressed together on cells, particularly in the peripheral nervous system, for reasons of evolution. And so there's an awful lot of potential here if we can try and understand it better.
Super interesting, but it's also a little bit overwhelming with the TRPs. Do you explain this in quite some detail in the book?
Yeah, there's about 50 pages, I think.
Yeah. All lovingly edited by Sayoshi Books. Yeah, I tried to make the sentences very short and lots of paragraph breaks. But yeah, it's interesting reading, and there's a lot of diagrams which kind of explain things. But I think for viewers who are kind of still a bit confused about what TRPs are, is they're just like a gateway. It's like, and when they get into this state of regulation, like someone's in a chronic pain condition, it's like a telephone line that's jammed open, or it's
Yeah.
like, it's signaling all the time. So it's like an engaged tone. And then when you apply Moxa, you switch it off, you down regulate it, and then the pain goes away. So you basically trigger the TRPs that are jammed in the open position to go into a closed position. So you hang up the call with Moxa. So I think is that in a nutshell,
I think
Merlin?
that's it perfectly. And also to bear in mind that this is not the only mechanism anyway, but it's a mechanism that we can exploit for the benefit of our patients. I'm quite convinced of that. So remember that traditionally Moxa was used for intractable disease. That's in the traditional literature. So Big Pharma has woken up to these TRPs, and that's why what I know about them, I know, because they've supported a lot of recent research in the last 10 years. The Moxa book was Matsushima was published in 2012. Since 2012 to today, there's an awful lot of material out there. Why? Because Big Pharma recognized that these guys involved, or their dysfunction is involved in a huge range of diseases, which are, by curious coincidence, intractable of our own age, and also unfortunately are very common. So just going through them very, very quickly: digestive diseases, cardiovascular diseases, neurological disorders, including the big ones, the really big ones: cancer, mitochondrial dysfunction, host immunity. Again, these TRPs affect immune cells. They're expressed on immune cells. Body thermoregulation, obesity, amazingly, sickle cell disease. We don't see much sickle cell disease in the West, but it's a very common disease in other parts of the world, and in some anxieties. And also, Moxa's clinical RCT evidence confirms that it helps recovery from TB. We've just gone off the screen there, I'm afraid. So there's an awful lot of potential here. Big Pharma knows it. Big Pharma's playing money into it, plowing a lot of money into it. And it's kind of like, oh my God, it's ours. It's ours for the taking if we want to look at it. But in order to do that, and it refers back to Oran's discussion and what you were saying, Simon, it's about being more specific about how we move, how we use Moxa to try and find out how we can affect those items on that list that we've just had a look at in the slide. Which particular techniques might support, say, for instance, to attenuate the development of Parkinson's, which might have effect with a chronic pain condition, and my guess is, and it really is only an educated guess at this moment, is that there's a lot of opportunity here, and there's an awful lot we could learn. At the moment, I can say hand on heart that I have explored this with this thinking in mind with fibromyalgia, and I've been particularly exploring it with thermo-insensitive points on the upper back. And once I find the insensitive points, the hypo points, using Moxa on them to wake them up seems to have a significant effect on fibromyalgia patients. So I think honestly, that's just the preface. That's not even chapter one. There's an enormous amount of work to be done here, and we need to try and do it together. We need to try and bring in smart minds, much smarter than me. I'm not a biochemist, but there is stuff out there that we need to look at. Yeah. So that's my little talk. I hope that's of interest.
That was super interesting. And for me, Merlin, this is also very new stuff. So I'm curious, how did you find out about the TRPs? How did that?
Oh, it's a good question.
Well, and TRPs come about.
Yeah. Let me come out. Yeah. So I don't take any credit for that at all. The Mox Africa project was founded by myself and by Jenny Craig, another UK acupuncturist. Oran knows her well. It was Jenny who first came up with this. I guess almost by accident, but at that stage we just had a very Well, it's just a suspicion that there must be these temperature ranges are so specific. Moxa must play into it. And this one of between 43 and 52. To start off with, we thought that maybe large Moxa cones, you're going to be stimulating the one that goes off at 52 degrees. But now I think we've got a more refined ideas of it. But that's first how we came across it. And I think we came across it with the help of a um, of an immunologist at Portsmouth University in Birmingham, who in the UK, who pointed us towards them. But the literature that was out there back then was very limited. I mean, this is only 12 years ago, but very limited compared to what there is today. Big Pharma know they're onto something with this, but they need to get a drug into the system to tinker with these, and that drug will only ever affect one or two TRPs. And to be able to target, that's going to be very difficult. And also, they're expressed in the brain. And their ideal is to be able to get a drug through the blood-brain barrier into the brain to restructure the function of these TRPs. And they know that if they can do that, they can throw opioids out the window. They're onto something. So that's why they're putting money into it. We're doing it from the outside in. And we're doing it with a therapy which has already got 2,000 years of safety profile.
Yeah.
So we're coming at it from a very different perspective and a very exciting perspective if you think about it. But equally, how are we going to, from the upper back or from stomach 36, how are we going to really affect these guys in the brain that perceive the pain when they're dysfunctional? And nearly every one of those intractable diseases is characterized by dysfunctionality of the TRPs. It's part of natural aging, I'd suspect as well. I think that that's pretty much a given now, and which takes us back to longevity. This is why Moxa was used in the way it was, and why it was never completely put aside by the early acupuncturists, because it was doing something which acupuncture was never going to be able to do. I found one, just incidentally, I found one reference in the literature to acupuncture and TRPs, and that's with electroacupuncture. But that's not acupuncture as we know it, that's electroacupuncture. And just like with Moxa, we've got discrete types of treatment. So by referencing, there's also helps with acupuncture, we need to be careful about how we qualify it, because electroacupuncture is stimulating the nervous system in a different way to what conventional traditional acupuncture is, I'd say. I don't know whether that answers your question.
It more than answers my questions. Actually, it leads me to my follow-up questions. I hear what you're saying about the TRPs, but obviously this is all new to me, and I cannot make clinical sense of it. So is it correct to assume, okay, this is maybe how Moxa works, but if I just follow the Moxa protocols, if I follow how Moxa has been done traditionally, it works that way, and I don't need to worry so much when I work in clinic about the TRPs?
I would say yes. I hope I'm gonna make sense in what I'm gonna say. I suspect that we've got with acupuncture, we've got a system of points all over the body, and some points plainly do have effect in ways that other points don't. The electroacupuncture research on TRPs interestingly used, I hope I've got this right, I think stomach 36 and bladder 60, and they reduced pain probably in mice or rats. I can't remember now, but it was animal research. So basically,
Can I jump in a sec?
yeah, please.
I think that what you're asking in a sense, Simon, is can I just do the normal Moxa that I do and hope to use these effects, or just hope that they're going to get triggered? And I think that what Merlin has done in his book, in the rewritten sections, is proposed a protocol, like a practical protocol for treating some of these intractable diseases. And if I remember rightly, then you use those points, bladder 60 and stomach 36,
Yeah.
as the kind of basic points. And then he used points by the spine in the area relating to the affected, so in a kind of dermatome way. And then you propose local points as well, like a kind of scattered Moxa, like
Yes.
doing Moxa and a thing.
Okay.
So basically he's come up with a protocol, and it's up to us as a community to kind of try and research the protocol, because yeah, he's finding it effective in his practice, and I've tried some of it out and I found it very effective in my practice. And I think there will be others who start to use it, and then we can research this and we can find a way to exploit these particular qualities of Moxa in a reasoned way, rather than just saying, oh, well, the old Moxa protocols from Fukaya are this, this, and this. We can say, why don't we do this in a new way? Let's apply it in a more scientific way. So I think that answers your question. And Merlin's described this in these new expanded passages about TRPs, like how to do this. So I think it's really worth us as a community engaging in research and experimentation until we get it right. Because the big pharma companies have done all this extraordinary research into these TRPs, and now we know much more about them now than we did 12 years ago. And they happen to be doing our work for us because we can trigger them in this very cheap, low cost, low tech way, just, with cones. And they're talking about, injecting into people's brains. So, we have a kind of lead on them, and we can use their work to inform our moxibustion.
And we're very lucky that almost all of it is on open source as well. So actually we don't just get the abstract, we get the full studies as well, which is unusual, I think. Yeah.
Nice.
Nice. And thanks, Oran, for the explanation so that even I can understand it. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to read more about it in the book, and especially, as you said, go on in the future and maybe do more research into that direction. Thank you both for talking about this. Where is the book? Is it already available, or when will it be available?
Yeah, the book is available on Amazon, and also you can order it through your bookshop. And yeah, so I think that's the main way to get hold of it, or maybe you can order it through you, Simon. So, but I'll send you a link, and when you send out the information about this, then you can also put the link in there.
Good.
Great.
Oran, we will see each other soon in March. You're here to teach the Manaka
Yeah,
course.
I'm really looking forward to that, and I bought some winter clothing. So
I hope you will need it.
the
The weather nice in early March. Merlin, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.